Hello, my darlings, and welcome to Radio Wasteland, the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm your host, Chauncey Howard. This is my co-host, Kara Kittrick.
Hello.
You got any news for us this evening, Kara?
Oh, no. I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, then,
no, I have
you can
news.
go home.
Yeah, okay. No, I have news. Don't send me away.
All right. What
this
you got?
is all I have. Okay. A short video published last week by U.S. Marine Corps veteran Miles Penoche describes a UFO sighting over a Lake Michigan nuclear power station in March. The video appears to depict a massive triangular craft floating through the air above the Point Beach nuclear plant. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was arrested Thursday in London after a 7-year stay in the Ecuadorian embassy. In 2010, Assange began publishing diplomatic secrets with the help of American intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning. Recently, Assange has come under fire for his role in releasing thousands of hacked Democratic emails, but he is currently only facing legal trouble for, quote, conspiring to commit unlawful computer intrusion, based on his agreement with Ms. Manning. The Chinese government has created an AI to track Uyghurs, a predominantly Muslim Chinese minority group. The algorithm is designed to identify Uyghur racial attributes and has been criticized for essentially being a racial profiling machine. Although people have long considered that such algorithms merely automate human bias, China seems to be explicitly attempting to do just that, using technology to track and control a specific racial group. This comes after years of reports that China has detained about 1 million Uyghurs in Chinese indoctrination camps designed to, quote, curb extremism. And, of course, last week humanity took a great step forward when astronomers released the first image of a black hole. And because we can't have nice things, men's rights activists, incels, and pickup artists are claiming that the black hole photo was faked in order to make computer scientist Katie Bowman, who compiled the images, look good. Others in the same group claimed that Bowman was actually minimally responsible for creating the code, pointing to other members of the team instead. Despite fellow scientists taking to Twitter to set the sexists straight, such conspiracy theories are likely to continue. Back to you, Chauncey.
All right. You know, this seems so that the Marine sighting. Was that a government video, or was he a Marine that took the video?
He was a former Marine.
So the video was taken post.
Right. He was just a private citizen.
I see.
But he was at one point a Marine. Which
not that I'm negating it because of that. I just there's been so much release of.
Right.
Government stuff.
No, you're right.
Yeah, I was making the connection, maybe jump into conclusions there. I got to say, Julian Assange.
Mm-hmm. Polarizing figure.
I've always thought this guy was shady. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I can't find a hero in somebody who, okay, this guy got kicked out of the Ecuadorian embassy because he was a jerk.
That is true.
He didn't get kicked out for anything else. He got kicked out for basically not only looking like, but living like Trevor Slattery from the third
Iron Man movie.
Yeah. So he looks like the Mandarin, the actor that played the Mandarin. And apparently he lived in squalor. There was fecal stuff on the walls. It's just nasty, absolutely nasty.
Right.
And the Ecuadorians are all like, this guy's. So how are we supposed to take this guy seriously?
That's true. He is kind of like the Swamp Witch version of Edward Snowden. But still.
Totally. Yeah, Snowden. He had a haircut. There's something about a haircut. When you go to court, nobody's just I'm going to grow out my hermit beard for court.
I'm glad this is the level our discourse is on. It's he had a businessman cut. He seems fine in my opinion.
Right, totally. Well, I mean, it's true. All right,
I don't know. I have mixed feelings on him.
I do, too. I don't know. It's I do think that our government's lying to us, but I also...
Right.
I don't trust multimillionaires either.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing.
I don't see how we landed in this world where we're all the government's out to get us. Let's put our faith in corporate executives. It's no, they're out to get you too. The reason why your government is out to get you is because they're in the pocket of corporate executives. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate him being a whistleblower, but, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
I
can tell you, I am not going to blow that whistle after him because he's gross.
Well, yeah, get a different whistle. But,
yeah.
Okay, I guess technically Chelsea Manning is the one who is the whistleblower.
Okay, well, she's clean, you know.
Yeah, she's fine.
She's clean. Yeah.
She's in prison.
I mean, physically clean.
Right.
You know, clean as far as, like, legally, probably not.
No fecal material on
right.
the walls.
Yes, exactly. The Chinese, you know, building the world's first racist computer. That's. I
mean, far from the first racist computer, but they did it on purpose.
No, I don't know. We are right on the cusp of true AI. So this, the world's first computer, the world's first artificially, truly sentient computer might be a raging racist because it was made that way.
Yeah, that's quite possible. That's something people are worried about. So this isn't the first kind of system that's like designed to track suspects or whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of these systems have had this issue where it's like we weren't trying to design it that way, but you know, just based on the data we had.
Right, of course. Your biases go into everything, you know. It's
exactly.
Like now we're going to have to build a like white nationalist computer to like go against the Chinese racist computer.
Exactly.
They can duke it out in like war games or whatever, you know, and play a game.
But China was like, this computer is going to repress this racial group. And it's like, no, that's exactly what we want. Turn it on.
Right, yeah. Totally, yeah.
Because, like, China, as far as, like, Chinese Muslims are concerned, they have really not been cool in the last decade.
Well, I mean, the HateBot 2000 seems like it's going to take care of it. But, okay, so this is a question that I got for you. So, I have heard a lot about the Chinese, you know, coming down on their Muslim population.
Yeah.
And, you know, on a safety level, I mean, I don't get it, but I mean, I understand what's going on. We live in a world and we're trying to be concerned about that. But when I hear about, terror attacks and stuff like that, I don't know if I've ever heard of one in China.
Well, there have been.
Do they happen?
There have been extremist attacks in China. It's a huge country. We don't even hear about a lot of stuff that goes on there because people, frankly, aren't really that interested.
Right. I see, yeah.
But, yeah, there have been terrorist attacks, but, like, there's about 11 million Uyghurs in China. They've put about 1 million in concentration camps, essentially. That strikes me as an overreaction. Like, they're, you know, putting women and children in camps where they're educated not to be their religion. Just because.
Yeah. But
it's not great.
China is not exactly the good guys.
No.
I mean, they did build the hate. They did build the hate bot.
They did build the hate bot. Yeah, I'm critical of, like, a lot of countries. I'm very critical of the U.S., but, like, it's hard to do worse than China, man.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you get groups of people together, you know, they get scared. I got to move on before we get to the end here. First black hole photo ever fake, whatever. Those people can go to HE double hockey sticks. Space is important to me. I was really upset that this came on the news and it was considered like the last story at the end of the list at the end of the evening. And I'm just all, great, one of the greatest steps in human technology. And they're just all, and we got a black hole. Off to commercial, you know, and I'm just all great. You know, that's the world we live in. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. When we come back, we have our guest, Launton Anderson, better known in the real world as Stacey Galloway. She is the author of, let's get the book title, The Dyatlov Pass Incident. If you want to know what that is, well, you better come back.
Find all our shows and archives by visiting Radio Wasteland at radiowasteland.us.
All right. Welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest, her pseudonym is Launton Anderson, that she writes nonfiction under, but her real name, Stacey Galloway, and we're going to talk about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. I have to look at the word every time I say it out loud, and she's going to help us understand what that's all about. Stacey, are you there with us?
I am. Hi. How are you?
Oh, good. You know, normally I start by asking people how they got interested in this, but, you know, we're going to come to that later because I think a lot of people just maybe don't even know what this is. So can you give us a really basic rundown of what this situation is, and then we'll dig into it a little further?
Sure. This happened in Russia in 1959 during what they call, or what would have been called a winter hike at the time. And 9 young people, ranging in age from 21, actually all in their 20s, except one was 37, went on a winter hike. This entailed walking in skis, basically. So rather than hiking on foot, they were walking on skis through the Siberian mountains, and they never came back. So, excuse me, search parties were sent out and found the tent first. The tent itself looked orderly, aside from the fact that it was collapsed, but, from winds or whatever. But after the searchers lifted the tent and, kind of pried it off the frozen ground, there were splashes, knife splashes on the side of the tent. And that raised some concern. But like I said, the inside of the tent, the shoes were in piles, the clothes were in piles, the money was all there, their passports were all there, but the 9 hikers weren't there. Well, what ended up happening is they started finding their bodies up to a mile away, but not all 9 bodies were together. One was a half mile from the tent, one was 3/4 of a mile. The rest were roughly about a mile, but not all in the same places. One was buried in the snow. 2 were found near the remains of a campfire, but they didn't have their clothes, like their outer clothes on. They were down in, their long johns and stuff like that, all frozen, all dead. The last 4 were found, the last 4 were found, and that really is what kind of brings the Dyatlov mystery. Not that, the whole thing is mysterious from, the tent, the condition of the tent is collapsed. Things look orderly inside, nothing's crushed or anything, but there's splashes on the side of the tent. And now we've got the bodies up to about a mile away.
Right.
And those last 4 bodies, 2 of them had crushed ribs. 2 of them were missing their eyes completely, even the skin around their eyes. One of them had a broken neck. And those injuries were I don't even want to say the most unusual, but finding those last 4 bodies kind of, like I said, came into the whole pinnacle of the mystery itself. So now you have 9 very able hikers. They've all been on these long winter hikes before. They've endured different hardships. One had been bitten by a snake during a previous hike and came back and healed up, and she went out again. Another had been accidentally shot by a hunter, and again she healed and came back. The oldest of the group, the 37-year-old, was a World War II veteran. He had survived the war, had all sorts of decorations. And in fact, there's an interesting fact along with that hymn, is that only 3% of the men born the year he was born, 1921, that served in World War II, only 3% were still alive. And he was one of those 3%.
At 37.
97% had perished in the war. So it kind of sets the stage for his abilities as well.
Right.
So
why were they on the winter hike? Is this a government thing or a school thing, or is this like a vacation thing? Why are they out there?
Exactly. It was a combination. It was a hike that was sponsored through a university that half of them were still students in the university. The others were alumni, and then the 37-year-old, his name's Simon, he was actually applying to be an instructor there. So the university sponsored the hike, and they provided quite a bit of the supplies, although the students and alumni brought their supplies also. But the government itself at the time, now this is during the Cold War, the government of Russia liked to encourage athleticism, and they, kept an eye on that. They were looking for the best athletes and the best to either pull them in for their own, the Olympics or for further training, in athleticism, or even for maybe military-type duties. I mean...
I've seen Rocky IV. I know what they were doing. You know? I said, I've seen Rocky IV. I know what they were doing.
And
you know,
it really
they were trying to get out and train all the bad guys.
And, you know, that era was just fascinating. I mean, Russia really had a hand grip on its citizens. It was, even these hikes themselves, although coordinated through the university and authorized through the government, the Russian government itself didn't allow citizens to have maps. Now, people could, draw maps. I suppose you could buy maps, on the black market or whatever, but only official military, Russian officials themselves could actually legally own a map. So the saying back then was, if you didn't, one, you couldn't have a map, but if you didn't know where you were going, then you weren't supposed to be going there. So these hikes, although, like I said, sponsored through the university and then encouraged through the government, they didn't, the government didn't take that extra step with like, okay, here's an official map of the area. A lot of these students would, pass maps back and forth. In fact, it was somebody's job along the hike to kind of sketch and map out where they were.
Sure.
And stuff like that.
So as far as we know, they weren't there for any sort of scientific reason. They were just there purely recreationally and athleticism.
It really was. It really was. Now, they belonged to a hiking club at the university itself, and the hiking club had 3 tiers of hikes that they would allow the students to go on, with a Category 1 being the easiest, a Category 2 being kind of medium, and then Category 3 being this extreme one, where, now the point of the Category 3, which is what this hike was classified as, several of them were qualifying for this Category 3, but several of them had already done these. I'd say it was probably about half. In fact, there were only 2. Well, there were 2 that really weren't up at the Category 3 level yet. But they were approved to go. All this had to be run through the university and ultimately the government. They were approved. So the point of the Category 3 hike itself is, one, they're going on skis, so they're basically like ski walking or skiing, across all this terrain. Snow's 12 foot deep. It's January. I mean, it's negative 30 degrees at night. It's just really, really harsh conditions. The other expectation with the Category 3 is no form of communication. They weren't allowed to bring like a radio to communicate back and forth. I mean, they were pretty far out there anyway, so there wouldn't have been a lot of people to communicate with. But even, some sort of a radio for emergencies and stuff like that. But the other expectation is they would be carrying all their supplies themselves. There were no sleds. They weren't pulling sleds. This was all the tent, the food, any equipment, everything was carried in backpacks on their backs.
I see. So
all 9 of them were.
We don't have too long until commercial. We got about 2 minutes here until the break. But when we found them, were they lost or were they on the path that we expected them to be on?
Now,
I realized there was about a mile radius that they were either running or separated or whatever. But were they close to where we expected them to be?
The tent itself wasn't on the official course that they had submitted for their itinerary. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of folks that are much more expert at the map thing than, and I'm in awe of the folks that have looked at that say that some of the deviations could have come from some landmarks. They could have chosen to go the particular route they went for some reason. So that finding the tent itself took a few days. Airplane searches, kind of looking for tracks. The bodies themselves, it really didn't make sense for where the bodies were. They were in a straight line from the tent, but they were not like back on the trail they had just come from or anything. They were just kind of straight down the slope where the tent was, down the slope, and then up a 15-foot cliff. So they had to climb this cliff, and then the bodies. And that was the furthest bodies, those last 4. And then from that furthest point all the way back to the tent was almost like a straight line of bodies. And add to that,
I got to say that, let me cut you off there. We're about to come up on break here, but I got to say that straight line really brings to a lot more questions to mind here. But we're going to break here. You're listening to Stacey Galloway here on Radio Wasteland. We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and if you don't find this interesting, you might have the wrong show. Come on back. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass Incident with our guest, Stacey Galloway. You know, as you were talking about this, you know, there is a trail, a straight line. I actually have it here in my, I take notes as you talk, with questions that I may want to ask, and that was one of them.
He's a good student.
I am a good student. You know, the straight line implies to me that they ran as a group from something and were picked off one by one, because why would they all go in a straight line and die along the way? So really what I want to cover in this segment is, what do we think happened? You know, surely there's at least one theory, but I'm guessing there are several.
There really are, and there really are a lot of theories. So if we look at what we know, and one of the things, as I've already mentioned, the tent itself is, you know, in good shape, but collapsed, but was slash marked. So as folks look at that and that straight line, it kind of reads like a story. Oh, they slashed their way out of the tent. They ran a mile down the mountain, and something killed them one by one, or they all ended up as a group a mile away and started trying to come back. So that's kind of the story it tells. But if we look at what we have, which are, well, unfortunately, the bodies themselves and the injuries, or even before we even get to the injuries, if we look at the bodies themselves, they weren't wearing shoes. So, nor their coats, that, you know, we'll focus on the shoes for just a second. So we're talking about negative 30-degree weather, nighttime, and a mile. Now, in a diary entry just prior to this happening, the group had written down that they were making about a mile an hour progress. Now, this is on their skis, completely garbed out. Of course, they've got their backpacks on, but that's the type of progress they were making. Now, so if we look at that, and we're looking at their barefoot or in their socks, and they're a mile away, did they willingly walk or run a mile from their tent in their bare feet? I mean, you really have to think about what type of fear or what type of thing would send you pell-mell to really your death, barefoot in the snow in negative 30-degree weather, and then be up to a mile away. Something happened. Something happened in that tent. And now when we look at the tent, like I said, it's orderly. The only sign of disorder are the slashes. So this wasn't a group of, drug hallucination. That's one thing that comes up. You know, they decided to try drugs out in the Siberian wilderness this one night, and they freaked out. You know, nothing really accounts for it. We're talking about 9 very experienced, at least in this situation, hikers who are going to leave their only form of shelter, barefoot, not dressed appropriately, and walk an hour away. So the theories, the big theory, and in fact, the one that the most prevailing theory is avalanche. You know, an avalanche ran over the tent, and, you know, of course they would have had to leave at that point. They have no more shelter. But I've said it probably way too many times at this point, but things weren't crushed in the tent. The crackers weren't crushed. There was a cup of cocoa still sitting there, frozen, but still sitting there. A sandwich. I mean, there was just no sign of this chaotic craziness happening in the tent. So whatever happened, you know, that drove them out of the tent wasn't something like that, avalanche. Another interesting one, people come up with this ice slab. An ice slab came rushing down the mountain and crushed them and hurt them. Again, we have to account for them being a mile away, barefoot, not dressed appropriately for the weather. Of course, when their bodies were found, they had frostbite, you know, on all their limbs, and there's still no shoes or anything.
Right, and that snow would still be there. They would be buried. I mean, it's not like the snow. I mean, I get the concept. Okay, so here's this avalanche, here's this ice slide or something, and maybe they're in the tent, they hear the crash, they hear the bang, they get out of there as soon as possible so they can see. They're not really dressed, but they're just, okay, what's this crazy bang? And while out there missing the tent, maybe they get swept away. But evidence of that would still be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Crushed trees, something. I mean, the folks that found them were able-bodied outdoorsmen also. Some were lifelong outdoorsmen, hunters, people from the village. And that's one thing, when we look at the situation, we're looking at the original investigative files, and to a T, they're all, there's no sign of an avalanche. There's just no sign. There's no sign of this ice slab. The trees aren't crushed. There's nothing. Even another interesting one was a herd of animals, trampled over them in the tent, a herd of deer or whatever would be out there. But again, no sign of that. Now, their footprints were found outside the tent. One theory says they walked themselves in an orderly manner away from the tent like they were going to go make a bonfire somewhere. But it's not orderly. I do have those photos in my book, and it's kind of a chaotic scene. Now, unfortunately, forensic, technology wasn't around back then. Nobody really thought to take a bunch of photos, and when they did, they were using the actual cameras from the actual hikers themselves. So, that kind of adds to some of the confusion. But the footprints that we do have photos of outside the tent, it shows kind of a chaotic scene. There's a few handprints in there. There's really not a rhyme or reason. You don't see this straight line walking down. It kind of looks like a gathering. And interestingly enough, also, they found a lot of small items outside the tent, things that would have come out of pockets. And the hikers themselves, when they were found, the few that did have coats on, there wasn't anything in their pockets. But one had his gloves in his pocket, but they weren't on his hands. Some of the injuries
happened
that
fast.
go along with this is they had some abrasions around their forehead and their eyelids. Some of them had abrasions around their wrists. And this isn't even getting to the big injuries, like one of them had a 3rd-degree burn, 3rd degree all up and down his leg. And we've already talked about the crushed ribs, the missing eyes, the missing tongue.
What explains so was the tongue cut out or was it bitten out? Do we know?
Well, unfortunately, that's another thing. The autopsies themselves don't actually go out. He goes into a lot of detail with the clothes. I mean, he talks about things being buttoned, unbuttoned, and what color the clothes are. But when it came to that tongue, the coroner just said tongue and diaphragm of the mouth is missing. And what that means is the entire inside of her mouth was missing, and the tongue, all the way down to the hyoid bone, which is that little fragile bone in your neck that tends to get broken if you get strangled or choked or whatever. So
that kind of implies to me that it was eaten out. That kind of implies to me that something came along and maybe ate it post-mortem.
Right. And one thing I would like to bring up in this is for folks that, there are some folks that are familiar with the Dyatlov Pass mystery. There are a lot of facts out there. But one thing, as I was researching it and I was looking at the original investigative files, one of the things that hasn't really come to the forefront that I did include in my book is what's called a histology report. They went and microscopically looked at these areas of injury. They looked at that tongue area, and what they were looking for is signs of cellular bleeding, which would mean it would have happened while she was alive. With that, there was no sign of cellular bleeding in that tongue area. So that does go to the theory that scavengers, something ate it. But her eyes were missing also. That showed signs of cellular bleeding. That means that her eyes were removed while she was alive.
Man, this is like the greatest horror film, They actually made a horror film of it called The Devil's Pass, but
of course they did.
But it wasn't great. But man, this is like I'm a raging horror aficionado, and this story to me is just over the top, just intense. All right, Stacey, we're coming up on another break here. We're talking to Stacey Galloway about her book, The Dyatlov Pass Incident. And man, this is absolutely terrifying. As I'm sitting here talking to Stacey, I'm watching Kara's face, and she has like this horrific look on her face this whole time because it's like, the handprint, as soon as he said about the handprint, she's just like, oh my gosh. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland with our guest, Stacey Galloway. Come on back.
You're listening to Radio Wasteland with Chauncey and Kara. And don't forget to follow Radio Wasteland on Facebook at facebook.com/radiowasteland.us.
All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. We're talking to our guest, Stacey Galloway, about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Some of the sort of paranormal conspiracy explanations for this are potential infrasound testing, causing panic attacks, military test. And
Yetis.
Yeah, there is actually one about the Discovery Channel in 2014 had a special called The Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives, that explored the theory of the Dyatlov group was killed by a Menk or Russian Yeti. But I got to put it out there to you, Stacey. You wrote this book. What do you think happened?
Well, when it comes right down to it, when we look at the string of injuries, the unusualness of the tent itself, like I said, the abrasions on the eyelids, their injuries themselves start to tell a story. And, we're looking at abrasions around their wrists, abrasions around their ankles, again, small trinkets around the tent. To me, it all points to somebody or a group of somebodies forced them out of that tent and took them away and caused their murders.
So you think it might be like, Russian yokels? Like wood people?
Well, interestingly enough, that's...
I don't know what to call them, but yeah, so, like crazy wrong turn, right. Mountain inbreds or something, I don't know.
Right. There's a local native group that lives there called the Mansi, but they're a gentle, peaceful tribal people, kind of along the lines of, just on the land. They've never done this type of thing before, so they were almost immediately ruled out. There is a local hunter. This is kind of an interesting twist to it. One of the last words in Zena's diary, one of the females, there were two females in the group, the last word in her diary was the name Rempel, R-E-M-P-E-L. And interestingly enough, he was one of the last people to talk to the group before they actually set off into the wilderness. Nobody knows what that conversation was about. The reason why we know that happened is because there was a 10th member of the group that turned back. He had a nerve condition. He didn't feel like he'd be able to complete that rigorous hike, so he turned back. He saw that conversation, but didn't think to ask, what was that about. So that's kind of an interesting little thing. So if we're talking about murder, and really the pieces fit together for that, the chest injuries could be somebody kneeling on their chest. We know the eyes were removed while they were alive.
Yeah,
the group didn't do it to each other.
Well, that is one of the other, as I've pointed out, I'm a horror movie fan. Have you ever seen Jacob's Ladder?
I haven't, and it's on my list, actually, on Netflix. It's either Netflix or Amazon, but
Did
no,
you just spoil it? Did they
but
turn on each other?
Well, no, I didn't. I didn't spoil it, but there is these possibilities that I think some of the government stuff, because we know that they were shady. We know that our government was shady at the time because we were in this Cold War. And we were doing a lot of shady things in order to try to get the upper hand in the name of security. And they were doing the same. And I wouldn't put it past them, especially with, a lot of the descriptions that you've given of the way they support athleticism. They're looking for the best. I mean, it's very Nazi-esque, sort of attitude towards their people as being a tool more so than their people. And
only the strongest of you will make it through.
Right? Yeah, totally. It's like I wouldn't put it past some sort of military testing or testing of a tool or testing of a drug. I mean, it is within the realm of possibility.
Right, and interestingly enough, after those last four bodies were found, which were the most horribly injured, the ones, like I said, with the missing eyes and the crushed ribs, the autopsies were done rather rapidly. The whole area was shut down for years and years after that. Now, this is an area that had been used by civilians, and this isn't the only hiking club out there. All the universities had their own hiking clubs, and there were several hiking clubs within that particular university, too. So the entire area was shut down. So it really does. It points to that the government knowing something. The files were classified up through the 90s, I believe. This is so many, I mean, for as big as this mystery is and as many people that were killed or found dead, this isn't like a worldwide, it's still a new subject to a lot of people. The files were classified up until the 90s. A journalist actually wrote a book about it, and the rumors are he had to change some things in it. There's also a rumor that the entire file, although it says they say it's been released to the public now and unclassified, there's a lot of rumors that that's not actually the case. A lot of the photos with the official file that's been released, a lot of photos were actually loose in envelopes and don't belong to any particular camera film. There's people that have devoted years and years just to match these photos to whose camera they came out of. Right. And there's still photos that came out of the official file that were supposedly taken by the hikers themselves that don't fit in any particular roll of film that we have access to.
Right.
So it really does everything you were saying, Chauncey. It just kind of looks, there's pieces missing. These pieces don't fit all together. And the government, especially back then, Cold War, nuclear arms race, it was a very, very different world.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, we're coming up on the end of the show here. Before we finish this up, I definitely have to thank our engineer, Jared, for bringing this topic to light. This was something that we had heard about, but Jared actually brought it up and said that we had to have it on the show. So thank you, Jared. Although, he's in there watching otter videos, I think. And Stacey, how can people find out about this book, get a copy of your book, and find out more about you?
It's on Amazon. It's called Death of Nine, the Dyatlov Pass Mystery. It is published under Launton Anderson. My name is Stacey Galloway. I use that pen name for this book. I write horror stories under Stacey Galloway myself, but I also have a website, StaceyGallowayAuthor.com. I'm also on Facebook, Stacey Galloway. And, but like I said, the book itself, it's out there on Amazon. It's free for Amazon Prime. It's in an ebook form. It's a beautiful print form too, but they're all, the same book. And it's, again, Death of Nine, the Dyatlov Pass Mystery. Lots of stuff in there. I've got the official autopsies. I've got that histology report I talked about with that talks about that wounds bled, so the missing eyes and stuff. I've got the illustrations of the injuries themselves. Not to sound morbid, but just kind of an illustration showing where these different injuries were. There's a lot of information in that book that you're not going to find just out on the internet somewhere. I spent years and years and years pulling this all together. I wrote the book that I wish had existed when I started researching this, and I really, really hope it helps everybody, from the folks that just don't know a single thing about this mystery to the people that have read everything, and I think it'll benefit anybody who wants to know just a little bit more about it.
And it is interesting, and I wouldn't worry about the drawings. I have a feeling with this story, morbidity is par for the course.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Stacey, thank you very much for coming on the show. This is a topic that we were very excited to have, and you definitely gave us all the backstory that we were missing, and I really appreciate it, and it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it, and you all have a very, very nice evening. Thank you.
You too. You've been listening to Stacey Galloway here on Radio Wasteland, talking about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. You can find out more about her by looking up Stacey Galloway or Launton Anderson, the pen name that she wrote the nonfiction under. Stacey Galloway, is a horror fiction writer, so Launton Anderson for the nonfiction. All right, thanks for checking us out. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. We've been listening to our guest, Stacey Galloway.
We sure have.
Pseudonym, Launton Anderson, about her book, Death of the Nine, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. What'd you think?
That was freaky as heck.
It was freaky. It was like, okay, you remember when we had, I feel bad, I forget his name. It was a great show, The Mothman Show.
Yes.
When he talked about his experience, his sighting.
Same energy.
Right, that like we are listening to a real horror film in this moment.
Yeah.
And
no, I felt like I was there.
Yeah. And it was
I've got a burn mark on my leg now.
Right. So, what do you think happened? I mean, we've just been given this. What do you think happened?
It does sound like the only reasonable explanation is that they were attacked by somebody.
By a person.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to jump to, they were attacked by a space alien when, it could have been a person. Like, it's unlikely either way.
Right. So
you may as well just say it was, that hunter dude who had graduated to hunting the most dangerous game.
Right, yeah.
And,
I don't
somehow took out 9 people by himself.
Are you thinking the Russian Yeti? No?
I mean...
You're not willing to go Russian Yeti just yet?
I would need a little more evidence before I jump to Russian Yeti. And, usually Bigfoots are very... They're not particularly aggressive.
Yeah, but I mean, this was the Ivan Drago of Yetis.
That's true.
This one was like eating eyeballs. Eyeball eating Yeti.
That is true. Well, maybe it was some... I mean, it's also possible it was some, crazy paramilitary, let's see how well how good you guys are at ambushing people kind of thing.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that it's, of course, my number one thing is that it's a deranged serial killer. They have had a fair amount of them, and some of the worst ones in the world have happened in Russia. Right. And in today's society, you live
alone in Siberia. I mean,
well, I don't even think it's a matter of living alone, because here in the United States, violence is on the rise. These sort of crazy situations are on the rise, and that's because people feel, I'm assuming that they feel marginalized, they feel control being taken away, and they basically sort of obsess about control, and what better way to control than to kill.
I don't know that violence is actually on the rise, though. I think
not violence, but, murder, shooty, mass crazy.
Right, okay, yeah mass shootings are on the rise, yes.
Yeah. And it kind of seems like in a dystopian world that is Russia at the time, Cold War Russia, it seems like, maybe people could just go ape caca and just, kill some folks, But taking that out, I would say that if I had to guess outside of deranged serial killer in the mountains, I would go to military testing of either a sonic weapon or a chemical weapon or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, infrasound makes people kind of anxious. It doesn't make people stab their way out of their tent and run barefoot.
It does give them panic attacks, so it would really only take one of them losing it. Yeah,
but that's not necessarily what a panic attack looks like. That's oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. I think I'm going to die kind of thing. But you don't necessarily pick up it and just run through the wilderness. Yeah. And 9 people don't all have simultaneous panic attacks.
Yeah, but if one of them goes nuts.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm saying. It's like, hey, we ran this test. 8 of them did pretty well, but that one, well, he took care of the other 8. So I'm kind of curious.
Okay, it goes really nuts.
So
it goes homicidal nuts.
Right. So I'm curious, how they all died, because I kind of, in my horror movie brain, here's kind of what I see happening. And I'm sure this isn't the case, but this is where my horror movie brain went. They're all in the tent. Something happens. One of them goes crazy.
Sure.
They all take off running from this one dude. Probably a dude.
Well, yeah. There were only 2 women.
Right, And he chases them down, kills them along the way, and then eventually in his craziness just keeps walking and freezes to death on his own right. Kind of like a Jack from The Shining kind of deal at the end there.
Right.
This is what my horror movie brain imagines.
All work and no play makes Ivan a dull boy.
Right. Yes. That's what happened.
It's possible. Another
mystery solved by the Radio Wasteland
team. So true. It was Jack Nicholson that killed them.
Yeah. Personally, I have to say, I am not a firm believer in, Bigfoot in general.
No, me neither.
I find Bigfoot in general to be a difficult one for me. That's not to say that if Bigfoot were proven to me, I would be all, no way. I'd be all like, oh, that's awesome.
Right.
I'd be down, but to hide so effectively well, I really just kind of come back to that gorillas were discovered in 1930 or something. That's the closest thing that can make Bigfoot kind of work for me. And then the trinkets on the outside, that's a little Blair Witchy. It's a little potentially Bigfooty. Why would these things be? Now, I wish I had asked her more about this because I was kind of left with the impression that the stuff around the tent was sort of laid in a potentially ritualistic fashion. Was that kind of your takeaway from that?
It sounded like it was just well organized.
Yeah, but she said trinkets. Like I'm imagining like a necklace and a book and like things that belonged to people.
I'm imagining like fingernail clippers and a comb.
You are?
I'm not thinking of like religious type trinkets.
Oh no, I'm not either.
Or mysterious or mystical trinkets.
No, I'm not either. I'm thinking what you're thinking, but why would they be laid around the possessions of the people? Because if I'm out there in my tent, doing my thing in 30 below, I'm not going to be, I left my comb out there in the circle of trinkets that we made around our tent. It's like,
I still don't think she ever said it was a circle.
I felt like it was a circle.
No.
Maybe I'm just reading in my own dream of, satanic ritual into this one, Because as soon as I hear missing mouth and eyeballs, I automatically go towards Satanism and something cool like that.
That I had always written off okay, it was wild animals. Those are the easiest bits to get at.
Yeah.
But then the fact that this one person was alive when it happened, I'm like, oh shoot.
Yeah, but hypothermia is, kicking in. Maybe she's dying. She's immobile. She's been messed up, and the animal eats her eyes because it's the warm parts and it's the soft parts because she's still alive.
That's still horrifying.
Oh, it's totally horrifying. It is totally horrifying.
Yeah.
All right. So I got to say this has been one of my favorite topics that we have ever had on here.
One for the books.
Definitely one for the books. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland as we've talked about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Come on back. We'll talk about what we got going on next week. All right. Welcome back to Radio Wasteland. Kara, next week we have guests Tara and Jessica. This is a local one. They're going to be talking to us about the Bidwell Mansion haunting. Bidwell.
I didn't even know there was a Bidwell mansion haunting.
You know what Bidwell Mansion is.
I know what Bidwell Mansion is.
So in Chico, the old.
Yeah, I just didn't know it was haunted.
Me neither. It's a Bidwell Mansion haunting, and so this is kind of exciting to me because it's local.
Yeah. This is something, you could go see, and you could go get, locked in a nursery and watch all the blood seep out of the walls.
Yeah. Well, I have to say I'm happy that this portion of our show does not air locally on the radio. This portion of our show is part of the podcast because I have to say people have talked to me about do you want to go do a tour of Bidwell Mansion? And I'm all like, no, absolutely not. It sounds incredibly boring, but now as soon as I read this.
Well, this spices it up a little.
Right. As soon as I read this, I'm just all like, what have I been missing? Is this part of the tour?
Well, I don't want to do a tour there. I want to go and check for ghosts. I want to do a paranormal investigation with
but you got to walk through it during the day, find out the history, get all the stuff. I mean, it's basically being taught by a teacher. That's part of the thing.
Well, I guess.
And then at the end, when it's all over, you hide in a closet. You wait there for like 8 hours. And then you come out.
No, I want to show up in the dead of night. I want them to be like, oh my God, thank God you've come.
Totally.
You've got to get in here, and I want to come in with my rope and my flashlight and my goggles and my spirit box.
Okay, here's how I see this going.
Check it out.
You show up, it's a rainy night.
Yeah.
You stand under a lamppost staring at it for, a good 15, 20 minutes before you finally get the muster to go up in there, because you can see the aura of evil around the Bidwell mansion. And you go up and you knock on the door, and it takes forever. You hear banging, and then they undo like 40 locks, and then they open the door and they usher you in because they're so happy that you came. And basically they're all sleeping in the living room because they're terrified.
Yeah.
They're having a docent sleepover, because I'm assuming nobody actually lives in the Bidwell mansion.
Of course.
So is this about right?
Yeah, and then later in the tour, I find their bodies and realize they've been dead the whole time.
And that it was you that killed them.
Yeah.
Damn. Why are we wasting our time with this stupid show? Why are we making good horror films? What a waste of time. All right.
I don't even know.
Next week,
talent like this.
Next week, come back and waste some time with us. It's going to be Bidwell Mansion Haunting with our guests Tara and Jessica. That's the local one for you Readingites, and it's also nice to have a local one. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. I've been Chauncey. She's been Kara. We'll see you next week.
Just got back, here I go again. Round and that turn back, there's another man. Well, he just left town, and baby, he's coming home. Even though you chose it before, well, you won't wanna be alone. We all change, but not so much. The people that destroy us become the ones we love, and it's all the same. Well, that's not so. Well, you gotta move on, baby, before you die alone. Well, you're gonna die alone. Just left town, but now he lives down the street. So you're gonna give it a go, and who cares who you might be? While you rehash the past and find solace between some sheets. I'm not judging you, well I've done it, so take it from me. We all change, but not so much. That the people that destroy us become the ones that we love, and it's all the same. Well, that's not so. Well, you gotta move on, baby, before you die alone. Well, you're gonna die alone.